Have you ever stayed somewhere so isolated that every little sound started to feel wrong? Imagine driving deep into the mountains, miles away from other people, where the only thing surrounding you is dark forest and silence. No neighbors. No traffic. No city lights. Just endless trees and a quiet cabin sitting alone in the wilderness. That's exactly where I found myself a few years ago during a work trip. At first, it felt peaceful. It felt like an escape from stress and noise. But sometimes the places that look the most beautiful during the day become terrifying after midnight. And what happened to me in that cabin is something I still think about almost every night. One of the best parts about my job is getting to travel around the country. Most of the time my company books hotels for me, but this trip felt different. I was heading to the Adirondack Mountains during fall, and honestly, I wanted a break from people. I wanted quiet. So instead of staying in a hotel, I rented a secluded Airbnb cabin hidden in the woods. The pictures online looked incredible. A beautiful wooden cabin with large windows, hiking trails nearby, and a deck overlooking the mountains. It looked like the perfect place to relax after work meetings. When I arrived Friday night, everything felt normal. I sat outside on the deck with a drink in my hand, listening to the wind moving through the trees. It was calm. Peaceful. But looking back now, I remember feeling uncomfortable even then. Like the woods around me were too quiet. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to go jogging on one of the trails behind the cabin. The air was cold, and the forest looked beautiful with all the fall colors around me. But only a few minutes into the jog, I started getting this horrible feeling that someone was watching me. You know that feeling your body gives you when something doesn't feel right? I kept looking over my shoulder expecting to see someone standing between the trees. But there was never anyone there. Every sound made me jump. Branches snapping. Leaves crunching. Birds suddenly flying away. I tried laughing it off and blaming it on anxiety. I told myself I wasn't used to being alone in the woods. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. After the jog, I returned to the cabin, showered, and spent most of the day relaxing before work. But throughout the afternoon, I kept hearing strange noises around the house. At first it sounded like footsteps upstairs. Then scratching sounds inside the walls. Sometimes I heard soft creaking noises coming from rooms I wasn't even in. Every time it happened, I forced myself to stay calm. Old wooden cabins make noises all the time. That's normal. At least that's what I kept repeating in my head. Later that evening, I drove into town for work and met up with coworkers afterward for drinks. Honestly, I didn't want to go back to the cabin. I couldn't explain why. Nothing bad had happened yet. But something about that place felt wrong in a way I couldn't describe. I got back to the cabin around 10:45 that night. The drive through the mountains felt longer than before because my nerves were getting worse. I remember talking to myself in the car, trying to calm down. I kept saying it's just a cabin, just an old house in the woods. When I got inside, I checked every lock 3 different times before trying to sleep. But sleep never really came. Every little sound outside snapped me awake again. I tried listening to music on my phone, but somehow the silence between songs felt even scarier. Around midnight, I finally gave up trying to sleep and decided to go downstairs for a cigarette. I grabbed my coat, phone, and cigarettes, then slowly walked downstairs into the dark living room. At the bottom of the stairs was the kitchen area connected to the living room. The only light inside the cabin came from the moon shining through the windows. As I stepped forward, I noticed something strange near the kitchen. At first, it looked like a shadow blocking part of the moonlight. I froze instantly. My stomach dropped so hard it almost hurt. I stood there staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself that my eyes were playing tricks on me. Slowly, I reached toward the light switch. And the second the lights turned on, I saw him. A man standing silently in the kitchen. Tall, Long messy hair. Thick beard. Dirty clothes. He just stood there staring directly at me without moving. For a few seconds neither of us said a word. It felt like time completely stopped. Then suddenly, the man charged at me. He moved so fast that my brain barely had time to react. Thankfully, there was a kitchen counter between us, which slowed him down for a second. That second probably saved my life. I turned and sprinted upstairs as fast as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it before immediately calling 911. While I was talking to the dispatcher, the man started banging on the door. Not knocking. Slamming against it with full force. Each hit shook the entire room. But the worst part wasn't the banging. It was what he was saying. In this strange emotional voice, he kept yelling that he loved me, that he had changed, and that he needed me back. I screamed that he had the wrong person, but he just kept repeating the same terrifying sentences over and over again. The banging kept getting louder. Eventually, pieces of wood started breaking off the bedroom door. I could actually see part of his hand punching through the wood. That's when I realized the door wasn't going to hold much longer. Then suddenly, through all the noise, I heard sirens outside. Moments later, police officers burst into the cabin downstairs. I heard yelling, crashing, and heavy footsteps. At the same time, I climbed out the bedroom window onto a small roof outside. One of the officers spotted me and helped me safely climb down. Meanwhile, several officers dragged the man outside in handcuffs while he screamed complete nonsense into the night. Even after they arrested him, he kept staring at the cabin with this empty, disturbing look in his eyes. Later that night, police finally explained who the man was. He was the ex-fiancé of the woman who owned the Airbnb. After a bad breakup, he disappeared for a while and secretly returned to the property. But the truly horrifying part was this: he had already been living inside the cabin for several days before I arrived. Police found beer cans, food wrappers, blankets, and personal items hidden inside one of the closets. He had been secretly hiding there the entire time while I slept only a few feet away from him. And when officers searched him, they discovered a kitchen knife tucked into his belt. That's when I realized something horrifying. When I walked downstairs and caught him standing in the kitchen, he may have been reaching for that knife. Even now, years later, that story still messes with my head. The scariest part isn't the chase or the police or even the man himself. It's the realization that I spent hours trying to lock myself safely inside that cabin, while the real danger had already been inside the house the entire time. Every strange noise I heard. Every uncomfortable feeling. Every moment of paranoia. None of it was in my imagination. Somewhere inside that cabin, a stranger was silently watching and waiting. And honestly, ever since that night, I've never been fully comfortable staying alone in unfamiliar places again. Have you ever opened your door late at night and instantly regretted it? Imagine staying alone in a stranger's house, far from home, when someone suddenly rings the doorbell after midnight. At first, you think maybe it's a mistake. Maybe someone has the wrong address. But then the person refuses to leave. And little by little, you begin realizing that they may not be at your door by accident. What happened to me at that Airbnb still bothers me because even now, I can't tell if I narrowly escaped something terrible, or if my mind simply connected a series of terrifying coincidences together. About 2 years ago, I had a job interview in another state. It was around a 5-hour drive from where I lived, and instead of driving all the way back home afterward, my fiancée suggested I stay overnight nearby. She found an Airbnb only about 10 minutes from the office where my interview would take place. The house looked cozy online, and the owner seemed friendly while messaging me before the trip. He even offered to let me check in early so I could relax before the interview instead of rushing there after a long drive. At the time, I thought that was incredibly nice of him. Looking back now, I wish I had stayed in a crowded hotel instead. The interview itself went well. At least I hoped it did. Afterward, I grabbed some tacos, drove back to the Airbnb, and planned on having a quiet night before leaving early the next morning. The house actually felt comfortable. There was a large couch in front of a fireplace, a huge TV mounted on the wall, and surround sound speakers that made the place feel almost like a private movie theater. I didn't want to sleep in the bed because I've always found it strange sleeping in someone else's room, so I planned to sleep on the couch instead. Around 11 p.m., I grabbed a blanket, turned on Avengers: Endgame, and slowly started drifting off to sleep. Then suddenly, the doorbell rang. At first, I thought the sound came from the movie. But a few seconds later, the bell rang again. I checked my phone. It was 11:33 p.m. Instantly, my heart started beating faster. Who rings someone's doorbell that late at night? I stayed still for a minute hoping whoever it was would leave. But then it rang a third time. Then a fourth. Every ring made me more nervous. Finally, I got up and carefully walked to the front door. Before opening it, I looked through the front window. Standing outside was a skinny man holding a small brown paper bag. His head was lowered so much that I couldn't clearly see his face. I opened the main door but kept the screen door locked between us. Without lifting his head, the man quietly said, "Pizza delivery." But there was no pizza box. Just the small brown paper bag in his hands. I told him he had the wrong address because I didn't order any food. Then I shut the door and started walking away. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again. Frustrated now, I returned to the door and opened it. Before I could even speak, the man repeated the exact same sentence in a cold, emotionless voice. "I have your pizza." I told him again that I didn't order anything. Then slowly, he repeated the address of the house and claimed the delivery belonged there. As we argued back and forth, I suddenly noticed his hand slowly reaching toward the handle of the screen door. The second I saw him touching the handle, I slammed the main door shut and yelled at him to leave before I called the police. Then I quietly moved toward the front window to watch him. After standing there silently for another minute, he finally walked back toward his car parked in the driveway. It was an old red sedan with one broken headlight. As soon as he got inside, I felt a little relief. But only a few minutes later, while walking through the kitchen, I noticed bright headlights still shining through the front windows. The car was still sitting there. Engine running. Lights on. Not moving. I went upstairs to get a better view from one of the bedroom windows, and the entire time I kept wondering why this guy was still outside. At that point, I was more annoyed than scared. I kept debating whether I should call the police or simply go outside and tell the guy to leave. Eventually, I decided I didn't want to bother the police over something that might be nothing. So I threw on my shoes and walked outside toward the car. I remember trying to act confident even though my stomach felt tight with anxiety. But the moment I reached the driver's side window, all the confidence disappeared. The car was empty. Completely empty. The engine was still running. The headlights were still shining. But the driver was gone. The second I realized that, panic hit me hard. I immediately turned around and ran back into the house as fast as I could. Once inside, I locked the front door and secured the chain lock at the top. My mind was racing now. If the man wasn't inside the car, then where was he? I grabbed my phone and went upstairs to one of the bedrooms while texting the Airbnb owner about what was happening. But I didn't get a reply. For several minutes, I stood by the upstairs window staring into the darkness outside. Then finally, I saw movement. The skinny man casually walked back toward the car. But what terrified me most was the direction he came from. It looked like he had been standing near the front porch of the house the entire time. He climbed back into the car and slowly drove away into the darkness. After that, I couldn't sleep at all. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the bedroom floor watching random videos on my phone while constantly listening for sounds downstairs. Around 4 a.m., I finally decided to give up on sleeping altogether. I showered, packed my bags, and prepared to leave as soon as the sun came up. But before walking out the front door, I noticed something horrifying. The door was slightly open. Not fully open, just cracked enough to notice. The only thing stopping it from opening wider was the chain lock. I stood there frozen, trying to remember if maybe I forgot to lock it after the last encounter outside. But deep down, I was almost certain I locked it. Then another terrifying thought entered my mind. When I ran back inside after seeing the empty car, I never checked whether the screen door fully closed behind me. As soon as daylight appeared outside, I grabbed my bags and rushed to my car. While backing out of the driveway, I noticed the same brown paper bag sitting near the porch. For a moment, I thought about walking over to see what was inside it. But honestly, I didn't want to know. As I drove away from the neighborhood, I passed an ugly greenhouse near the end of the street. Parked outside was the same red sedan with the broken headlight. Or at least it looked exactly the same. Later that morning, the Airbnb owner finally replied to my messages and asked how my stay was. I explained everything that happened. The fake pizza delivery. The strange man. The unlocked door. The red car outside. I saw the typing bubble appear on my phone like he was about to answer me. Then suddenly, nothing. He never replied again. And months later, when I searched for the Airbnb listing online, it had completely disappeared. People always say children imagine things. They say kids see monsters in the dark because their minds are creative. But what if sometimes children notice danger before adults do? What if the thing standing outside the window at night isn't imaginary at all? A few years ago, my family and I rented a beach house through Airbnb for a short vacation. We expected a peaceful few days near the ocean. Instead, we experienced something so terrifying that my family still talks about it in whispers. And the worst part is realizing that my son had been trying to warn us from the very first night. My wife and I decided to take our kids on a small beach vacation during the summer. Nothing fancy, just a few relaxing days away from work and school. Hotels near the beach were expensive, so my wife found a cheaper Airbnb house only a short walk from the ocean. The house sat at the end of a dead-end street, and behind it was a small creek surrounded by trees. At first, the place felt perfect. Peaceful. Private. Almost too quiet. We arrived in the afternoon and spent hours at the beach before checking into the house. My son was 8 years old, and my daughter was 13. Normally they fought constantly, but during this trip they were getting along better than ever. Looking back now, those first few hours were probably the happiest part of the entire vacation. That first night felt completely normal. My wife cooked dinner while the kids explored the house and picked their rooms. Later, we all sat around the table playing Uno and laughing together for hours. Eventually everyone went to bed, exhausted from the long day at the beach. I slept perfectly. But the next morning, my son looked awful. He barely touched his breakfast and kept staring down at the table. At first, I thought maybe he wasn't feeling well. But after we kept asking him what was wrong, he finally admitted something strange. He said he saw ghosts outside his window during the night. The moment he said it, I almost laughed. But then I saw how scared he actually looked. His hands were shaking while he talked. My son explained that during the night, he saw dark figures moving near the trees behind the backyard. According to him, the shadows slowly walked toward the house before disappearing again into the darkness. Then he said something that immediately made the room uncomfortable. He claimed one of the figures stopped and waved at him through the window. By the time he finished telling the story, tears were running down his face. My wife and I tried comforting him by explaining that ghosts weren't real. We told him his imagination was probably making ordinary shadows look scary. Eventually he calmed down enough for us to continue the day. We spent another fun afternoon at the beach, trying to forget the whole thing. But deep down, I could tell my son was still terrified. When we returned to the house later that evening, I noticed the front door was unlocked. I asked my wife if she forgot to lock it before we left, but she wasn't sure. Normally I'm obsessive about checking locks, so it bothered me more than it should have. Still, nothing inside the house looked disturbed, so I brushed it off. That night, after dinner and card games, the kids went to bed around 10 p.m. while my wife and I stayed awake a little longer talking in the living room. Close to midnight, there was a soft knock on our bedroom door. It was my son again. The second I saw him standing there trembling, I knew something was wrong. In a shaky voice, he whispered, "The ghosts are back." I immediately checked every window in the house, expecting to see nothing. But one thing did catch my attention. The floodlight behind the house had turned on. Still, I told myself it could have been anything. Maybe an animal moved through the yard. Maybe the wind triggered it. I tried calming my son down, but then he said something that made my stomach tighten. He claimed one of the ghosts tapped on his bedroom window. According to him, the figure quietly threatened to hurt the family if he screamed. Then it supposedly told him to open the door. Instead of opening it, my son ran to wake us up. At that point, I still didn't believe in ghosts. But I did start wondering if someone was actually outside the house watching us. That night, my son slept in our room because he was too scared to be alone. Honestly, I barely slept either. The entire night I could feel him shaking beside me under the blankets. The next morning he looked even worse than before. That's when I suggested we all sleep together in the living room that night like a family campout. We built a giant blanket fort, brought out snacks, and tried turning everything into a fun memory instead of a scary one. For a while, it actually worked. The kids laughed while watching movies, and slowly the fear inside the house started fading away. Eventually, everyone fell asleep together in the living room. Then sometime around 2:30 in the morning, my son suddenly shook me awake. He whispered the words I was beginning to fear most. "The ghosts are outside." Half asleep, I looked toward the sliding glass door expecting to see empty darkness. Instead, I saw 3 figures standing outside the glass. For one horrible second, they didn't even look human. They wore black hooded clothing and strange masks with large white eyes that reflected the light. My wife screamed immediately. My daughter grabbed her phone in panic. Meanwhile, the figures simply stood there silently staring into the house like they had been watching us sleep. Suddenly, one of the figures grabbed the sliding door handle and tried opening it. Thankfully, the door was locked. My daughter quickly called 911 while I grabbed the only thing nearby that could possibly be used as a weapon, a heavy walking stick leaning near the wall. I knew it would be useless if they had guns or knives, but at that moment protecting my family was the only thing on my mind. I started screaming at them to leave us alone. And the creepiest part was how calm they seemed. Almost amused. Then one of the masked men slowly pulled out a knife and held it against the glass door while my wife and children cried behind me. I truly believed we were seconds away from those men breaking into the house. Then suddenly, everything exploded into chaos. Out of nowhere, police officers rushed into the backyard and tackled one of the masked men to the ground. The other 2 tried running, but officers hiding nearby chased them down before they escaped. When police removed the masks, what shocked me most was how normal the men looked. They weren't monsters. They were just young men barely out of their teenage years. Later, police explained that groups like this sometimes target tourist families staying in vacation homes because they assume families are easier victims. All 3 men were carrying knives. Even now, years later, my family still struggles with what happened during that trip. My son had nightmares for months afterward. And sometimes I still think about how close we came to opening that sliding door for people pretending to be ghosts in the dark.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe my channel. See you on next videos. Till then, goodbye.